My name is Charles Henry. I was born just up the road here in Bainbridge at a place called The Pond. I had two major influences really throughout my lifetime. As I started in school as a young boy and learned to read, I found out the power of books and the power of words. They could take you places that you had never really been before and help you understand different people and different cultures. They used to have a sale once a year, maybe once every other year down at the Solon Library. And while I didn't have much, if I had enough money, I'd go buy a couple of books. And you know what my favorite book was? Webster's Unabridged Dictionary. Now, the dictionary helped me understand words and helped me learn how to use them. And words have such power if you use them the right way. When I got to the Eclectic Institute, I was 22 years old, and that's when Garfield became such an influence in my life. He was the teacher and principal at the Eclectic Institute, and he started out as my teacher, then he became a mentor, and then he became a friend. And he helped me really understand how to use words. I enjoyed oratory, and I enjoyed debate. And Garfield would sit me down and he would look at some of what I was to say or how I was using words, and he would point out that maybe this word might work a little better here or this one a little better there. And uh, when I was set to graduate, I was given the honor of doing the oration for the graduating class. And I chose as my topic the poetry of science. And Garfield sat me down and he kind of went through it and he said, Charlie, this is good. Now, when you speak this, speak it slowly. Let those words hang out there so people can see them and feel them. And when I was all done, he came up to me, he put his arms around me, and he lifted me clean off the ground and said, Charlie, you did good. That was one of the proudest moments of my life. When the rebels fired on Fort Sumter and the war began, Garfield was given the responsibility of raising a company for the 42nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. So he got some of his boys from Bainbridge together, and I was the first one to sign up. There is no bond deeper than that is made between boys who go off to war and become men. I was wounded at Vicksburg, took a bullet right through my foot. Spent some time in the hospital, and then they sent me home to do my final recuperation. Now, I hadn't been home in a year and a half, and what a blessing it was to be home to see family again. But not only did I see family, I saw Sophia. Sophia Williams was someone we sparked a bit when we were at Hiram, and it was so good to see her again. When I was finally able to return, we went down to Baton Rouge, and the 42nd was doing provost duty in Baton Rouge, and I became a judge, a provost judge. Now, in that role, I learned about investigating, I learned about the law. I even had the honor to marry 2,500 Negro couples. When the war was over, I came back home. I married Sophia and went back to Baton Rouge. I stayed there about 3 years, working in the court system there. We made some good money and then decided it was time to come back to the pond, which we did. And we purchased a nice piece of property there at the pond, and life was good. Garfield was now in politics. He was in Washington, D.C., and our relationship deepened because I became his eyes and ears out here in Ohio. and when he was in the legislature in Washington, D.C. He appointed me to be an inspector in the Postal Service, and I was good at it. You know, they would even write about my exploits in the newspaper. Captain Henry got another one. And when Garfield was nominated, a lot of people around Chagrin thought I was going to be made the Postmaster General. Even wrote it up in the Exponent. Certainly, Garfield will have Henry become his Postmaster General. He's the most qualified person. But what Garfield did was even more of an honor to me. He appointed me to be the Marshal of Washington, D.C. Can you imagine how I felt being able to go to Washington, D.C. and work for the man who I loved deeply? That honor soon became a terrible experience. When Garfield was shot, as the Marshal of Washington, D.C., I became responsible for the safety and welfare of Guiteau, that assassin. What a terrible experience. But I did my job. I did my job. When it was all over, I came home, got back making maple syrup, and I even became the president of the Western Reserve Maple Syrup Association. I kept writing articles. People really seemed to, the newspapers liked my articles. I would write about Garfield, I'd write about our experiences in the war, I would write about crops. You know, there was even a time that there was a paper from Philadelphia that put out a contest. It said they'll give $25 to the person that writes the best article about raising corn. Well, I sat down, I wrote a 1,300 word article, sent it off to Philadelphia paper, and I won. After about 3 years, one spring when the sap was boiling, I was contacted by Don Pardee. Now, Don Pardee and I had worked together in the provost down in Baton Rouge, and Garfield had appointed him to be a judge in southwestern United States. And there was a lot of turmoil going on down in Texas. There was primarily strikes in the railroad, and he wanted someone to help him get to the bottom of it, and he had faith that I would do that. So he appointed me to be a special marshal, and off I went to Texas. Now, Texas was still a pretty wild place. I mean, those guys were wearing 6 guns, and you know, it was really an interesting experience. And I would write about it, and the papers loved it. The papers seemed to love the stories I would tell about Texas and the different people that I would meet there in the Southwest. I even started doing some political satire. I took on a pseudonym named Carl Darwin. Get it? Charles Darwin. And I would write stories about politics, skewer those Democrats a little bit. And that was written up in newspapers all over the country. Well, I got to the bottom of what was going on in Texas. I wrote it up. It was even published in the Congressional Record. After a couple years, I got contacted by Garfield's sons. They were attorneys in Cleveland, and they were working for a company where one of their executives had taken off with $20,000, embezzled $20,000. And they wanted to get that guy. All they knew was that he had gone somewhere in South America. They thought Brazil. So they gave me a photograph of the guy and a copy of his signature, and off I go to Brazil. You know what? I got it. And on the way down to Brazil, you know, you're riding on these different boats going from port to port, and you get to know the people that are all on the boats with you. And there was this one guy that seemed just, his story didn't make sense. So I sent off a telegram and we got into a port and got into the next port and I got a response. And sure enough, that guy was an embezzler too. So I got him. And again, the papers love this stuff. Captain Henry does it again. So that led to me actually going into after another embezzler in Costa Rica. So eventually I came back home and we started making that maple syrup again. And I worked for a surety company. And it was a wonderful way to continue with my life. The rest of my life went between making maple syrup and then whenever the insurance company wanted me to go find somebody, I'd go off and find them. And then I would write it all up. I remember when I was entering into the Eclectic Institute at Hiram, I remember looking around at all these boys that seemed to have everything and thinking, why do I have to work for everything that I get? Why can't I be like those boys? But you know what? Those boys could never imagine the life that I lived. Never imagined traveling throughout the world, becoming the confidant of a president of the United States. I truly have been blessed. Blessed with a life that was rich and full, and blessed with a wonderful family. Thank you.